Okay, now I'm ready to actually construct my vase. So there's a couple of things here. Some of you got smaller tubes than others. Those rolling pin tubes that I gave you, they can be used as your form. You don't even have to use this form. But what I do want to do is, if I want something roughly this size, again, remember it's going to shrink. It's going to be smaller than this. I'll grab a tube. I'll also take, and you can see with a regular piece of printer paper, I can wrap this around and overlap. So my size needs to be a little bit larger than the actual exact circumference, right? Because I want to overlap these and then I'll cut them at an angle, and you'll see that in a second. So I have about a 1/2 inch overlap. Generally, I'd want more like 1 inch. I've done this before, so it's a little bit easier. So you will have a little bit of your texture that's lost, but this is going to give me the length and give me the bottom edge. So you use that as a template. I can cut this to whatever shape I want. It's going to give me a different circumference if I make it shorter. And then I can kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like with paper. Paper is our template. Or I can freehand this. I don't need to use this cylinder. It's probably going to give me a little bit more of a organic feel. But with this, I'm going to show you first the more accurate technique. So what I'll do is I'll find a place on here that I like the texture. I feel like everything is solid. I'll also find a spot where if this is the height that I want, and that's the maximum height I'm going to get, I can get that. And so I'll go ahead and come right to the edge, right, I like this spot right here. And then I'll just lay this down gently. You can use your wooden knife, but it's going to drag, it's going to push the edge up. Your metal knife, this is kind of like a fettling knife, it's not really, it can help as well. And what I like to do is I like to use a straight edge. So I'm using the paper as a template, I'm leaving it there, but I'm bringing my wooden straight edge to the edge, and then I press down lightly and keep pressure into the side of this. So as I'm dragging this through, I'm pushing this a little bit against the side so that I know I'm getting it nice and even. And I can remove that straight away. I might want to keep that. I might want to do a handle. I might want to do something if I'm making cups. This is a vase, you don't have to do a handle. But little embellishments might be nice. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and line it up on both sides. It can be a little tricky to pull with your left hand. If you do, you can come around the other side. Pull that. Cut straight through. This probably isn't going to be usable. I can roll it up, put it back in my bag, keep it moist. Remember, all of these, I rolled out all these slabs, and in between each one, I took it and wrapped it in plastic. That's going to keep it exactly the same consistency. I want these to be a little bit closer to leather hard. So at that point, I now have two very sharp edges and square sides, and then I have a irregular lip. Maybe I like that. Maybe I want to leave that. Maybe I want to accentuate it. Maybe I'll come in and cut the ridge of this to have the exposed puzzle piece outline. Depends on the look I want. Remember, anything protruding, little bits and pieces could easily break off once we're done. So I could go ahead and cut this flat now, or I could wait and cut it later. I'm going to go ahead and cut it nice and straight now. And now I have a nice slab to work with. You can see the edge pulled a little bit when I cut that. I can address that later. Now I'm ready to wrap my cylinder with some paper and wrap this form around it. Okay, remember that slip that we used, that we started earlier on? I'm going to take the lid off that, and it's kind of still soupy, but it's got, it's soaked in a bunch of this. I'm going to go ahead and kind of mix that up until it's a good consistency that I like. And I'm not going to keep filming while I do this because it can be a little bit tedious if it hasn't soaked in all the way. And then I'll show you once I've mixed all that. Okay, here we go. So this is basically the consistency that we're looking for. It's kind of like a Greek yogurt. I use that as a texture or a descriptor a lot. You don't want it too wet, but you want it to have some body and hold. And if it's too soupy, it'll be hard to control, and it actually will take longer to dry. So the consistency does matter. So here we go. We've got our cylinder. We're going to wrap it loosely with newspaper. You want to make sure that it's loose enough to where it can easily slide off, but not so loose that it's like baggy, right? So here I can slide this tube in and out fairly easily. I don't want it to be pinching at the bottom because that will cause me to have a difficult time sliding my piece out later. So we'll wrap that like that. Okay, so I've got a couple things here. I've got my cylinder wrap that I'll use with this slab. This one I'm gonna kind of just freeform. So what you can do is you can go ahead and just, without that tube, wrap this around gently. You can notice that it's getting a little stiff. So at some of those sharper edges, they want to start tearing. So I want to be careful of that. I want to move gently, and I want to overlap this seam. Now some people, maybe they like that look. I don't. I've seen it in a number of things. So I'm going to go ahead and get this as lined up as I can, gently reaching into the inside. Hopefully I can get that nice and flat and level, and I have an overlap. Then I'll go ahead and I'll take and cut at a slight angle, cut straight down this cylinder so that I can get an edge to connect to. Now these fettling knives are not as nice as some of the ones you'll get at Phoenix Ceramics, so it can be a little bit more difficult to work with. Pull those out. Now I have two edges. Now you can see this, because it's equal thickness all the way across, it actually doesn't work the way a fettling knife does. There's a thick side and a thin side on a fettling knife, and you actually want to use the thick side to cut with, so as you pull through, it has no drag. So these are, this is the first time I'm using these kits. They're not as nice as I would hoped. At this point, you'll take and you'll score this surface with your scoring tool. Now this is like a little brushy end tool. You'll want to score this. I do like a cross-hatching technique. I'm trying to keep my head out of the frame so you can see this. I'm supporting it as I'm scoring it, and then I'll score back in another direction. Again, trying to film this so you can see it's a little different than how I normally do the demo. Don't worry that there's little bits and pieces everywhere. You want to score both sides. We will clean up those bits and pieces later. If you try to clean them up now or while they're still really wet, it can be really frustrating, and it doesn't work as effectively. At that point, I've scored both sides. I'll go ahead, and I like, for my slip, especially on smaller things, a little chisel tip brush like this. It's not quite in focus. I can apply the slip fairly easily with that. And I'll go ahead and take that slip, nice and consistent. And you can brush it on, you can dab it on. And what this is going to do is it's going to soak in. It's the exact same clay. So remember, you're using the same clay for your slip as the clay you're working with. Some people use colored slips. They give a definition to their seam. A lot of people like to hyper accentuate the seam. Some people like to hide it as best they can. That'll be up to you. That's a design element. And I want to be patient with this. I want to let this sit and let the moisture in the slip soak in to the clay body that I'm working with. That clay body's stiff, and it doesn't want to connect to itself easily. But by putting this slip in here, it's going to transfer that moisture into the clay body, and when I press it together, and the pressure is key, it will equal out the moisture content between the two sides and the clay that I'm sticking together. I want to let that sit for a second and let it soak in maybe 60 seconds or so, and be patient with that. You can wait a little longer too. You don't want to lose the sheen on the surface. Like you'll see it's a little shiny, you can't really see it from here, but the slip is a little bit shiny. If you let it sit too long, then you lose that sheen from the moisture content, and you maybe let it sit too long. So 60 seconds, couple minutes maybe max, and it'll absorb and evaporate some of that moisture. Okay, so again, continuing with the freehand style, I'm going to go ahead and set these pieces together and try to press them evenly all the way across. And again, I'm going to try and do this without getting my hat in the way. I'm supporting both sides. I'm supporting the back, and I'm kind of pinching together as I support those. I want this compression. I need the compression all the way across. Hey, there's Sam. And so if I don't have that compression, it's not going to stay together throughout my process. So I can take this now and I can flip it over, and I can use the other side to really get that pinched down and pressed together. The compression is as much a key as anything. And you can see I'm still a little bit wet on that slip. I could have waited a little longer. Every time I touch it and touch another spot, that's something I got to clean up later. And then the last step I would do with this technique is to take my wooden rib and kind of press it from the top surface to really kind of solidify that. And I can press in along the seam of this. But I'm gonna let that sit for a second and stiffen up. Now I'm going to wrap that with plastic so that I don't lose the moisture content. Organic feel, if you want it like really kind of perfectly symmetrical and cylinder-like, you'll probably want to do this technique. You'll go ahead and take your slab again. This is like leather hard, so I can pretty much stand this up on its edge and it'll support itself, which it would not have done before. I'll take my cylinder wrapped in paper and I'll just slowly wrap this form around this. Now I have way more than I need here, and I want to make sure that I'm taking and kind of patting the side of it, because that's going to give me that uniform feel to it. And then again, I'm going to try to overlap, and then I'm going to find a spot that I like, that the texture kind of lines up, or I like how the texture lines up. And then this again is a lot easier than when we're doing the kind of like more freestyle. You'll cut in at an angle and you'll travel up or down, but this time I can like press on that tube, that cylinder, and I get a much cleaner cut. And then I'll open this up, pull that little section out, and again I'm back to slip and score. Everything should line up perfectly so that I have, well, it looks like I messed up a little bit at the bottom. That's okay, I'll show you how to fix that later. But now you can see that seam is a lot cleaner. So I'll slip and score and do the same thing I just did. Okay, so I've reconnected those, and it's a little bit wet still on that slip. I do want to let that really, if I want to get the best results, I want to let that kind of soak in for a while. Because I have this cylinder backing on the other side, I can take my paddle. I would generally take and use the smooth side of my paddle, and I can paddle this surface into that other surface, right? So keep in mind that if that slip is sticky, it's going to stick on here, and you're going to transfer that texture as well. Now this texture technique does not require a lot of, you don't really have to address the seam, because there's nothing going from vertical to horizontal. There's no way to avoid seeing that seam. You can utilize that in your design, but if you paddle that too much, you're going to lose that texture that you have there. So there, I've got it pretty well symmetrical. all the way around. At this point, if I were to let this sit, I would have to take this cylinder out of the inside because it's going to dry the inside a lot more than the outside. But we'll go ahead and pull that out and we'll move on to the next step, which is creating the base. So what we'll do is if you can pull this out easily, we'll pull the paper and the tube, everything out. Now I have a nice cylinder, and then this is all just right here. Now I could also take and have slid this off if it was stuck to my clay, and this would be still in here, and then I can just twist that and remove it. What I can also do here, what I should have done is probably left this in so I have a little bit more stability, but I can transfer this over. If I want this texture on the bottom of my piece, that's fine, or if I want the texture in the on the flip side, then I can flip this and use either the smooth side or the textured side. Remember, if this is something that's going to be washed and there's texture on the inside, it's going to be much harder to wash it. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on the bottom and set my piece right down on top of it. What this is going to do is this is going to allow me a template essentially to trace my cylinder. And again, without blocking the camera, I'm going to try to trace this cylinder. And I also want to keep in mind, because this one's fairly symmetrical, it's not going to be as critical. Let's say I had something a little bit oblong, I would want to keep the orientation the same, so I'll just take my cylinder and set it directly behind. And then I would cut this, and I would know exactly which side it went on. You can also err on cutting it, leaving the line, so it's a little thick, and then you can trim it and clean it up later, and that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to go ahead and leave about 1/8 of an inch on the outside of that line, and I'll pick this up to give you a close-up once I'm done. I find it easier to pull towards myself whenever I'm cutting something. Be careful not to pull into yourself. So even though I'm pulling towards myself, I'm not pulling towards my finger. Oh, I just bumped that. So here, I'll peel that off. You can see here's my line, and that's how much extra I've left. Now what I can do is slip and score this entire surface, and I want to score on the inside, not the outside. I want to score right here. And I'll do a close-up of that so you can see it a little better. You didn't really see that earlier. You're trying to break the surface. These scoring tools, the more you spread out these little bristles, the more they kind of dig in. And you'll score all the way around. You'll put slip all the way around, and you'll do it on the bottom of that as well. And I'm not going to film while I'm doing that, but you'll see the results in a second. Okay, that only took a second, and you do want this to soak in a little bit. You can see that this is the exact same clay, but the clay with the moisture in it is much lighter color. I've slipped and scored both of these. I flipped this over so that I could score that and add slip, and now I'm going to flip it back, and I'm going to set it right onto the same place as I traced it from. So I'm going to line that up as best I can, and I'm going to press it in. So I'm kind of patting it down from top, but that does not mean that I'm hitting it very hard. I'm just giving it a little bit, just enough to stick. And then I'm going to go ahead and hopefully it's got it stuck enough, kind of wiggling it and pressing down, but trying not to mess with my texture too much. And if I got it, I can flip it. At that point, I've got my base on. It's going to be much easier to get that compression that I need by patting it from the bottom side. Remember, all the handling you do of this, clay has a memory. Now I've got a little bit of texture here. I don't want a high center. So what I want to do is, what I generally do is just take my thumb and just kind of pop it in the center. So you bring that center down, giving a slight arch. Now that'll be a raised area on the inside, but it'll be a dip on the bottom. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to set this down on the table without having it have a high center and making it rock around. I can choose to trim this off now with my fettling knife. Some people like to do it that way. Others like to use the trim tool. This is a paracord trim tool, and you can go ahead and just take it and trim it back until you get flush. The clay is still a little bit soft. You can see it's a little bit sticky. And so with sticky clay, if it's still stuck to my finger, if the clay's, it's leather hard, but it's still able to stick to my finger, it's probably not quite leather hard if it is sticking to my finger. It's going to be a lot harder to trim. So I'm going to wait. I'm going to let that set up, and then I'll come in and I'll trim it with this guy in a little bit. All right, I've let this sit for at least half an hour. It's pretty stiff now, so I can go in and I can trim this back and really clean up that edge. One of the things I can also do is go ahead and take, I like to take my wood rib and just slightly angle it in to give it a little bit of a bevel and draw that around the edge. Again, I like to pull towards myself, have a little bit more control than pushing away, so as I get to the next point, I can just rotate that. And my arm's going to get a little way in the camera right now, but I'll try to make it so you can see it. There we go. Now again, you can see that I've got that little bit of an edge. I can go in and, it's leather hard now, so I can go in and clean up all those goobers, like right in this area right here. Or I can wait for that to dry even a little bit more, and I'll have a little bit more control over it at that point. You can see right here is my fingernail where I accidentally poked it earlier. I can clean that up. You can even still see some of the canvas texture. If I want that, I can leave it. If I don't, I'll want to smooth it out. The other thing you can do is address the rim. So you don't necessarily want this perfectly flat rim, then you can come in and while it's still leather hard, you can kind of give a little bit of a pinch. It also gives it a thinner look. So the clay is about 1/4 of an inch, but you can pinch this up and make it almost an eighth, look like it's an eighth of an inch. So you want to decide what aesthetic components you're going to present. If you want to have a thin, light look to it, but also have some weight and some body that, say I'm going to put flowers in here, I'll want to have weight in it so that it doesn't tip over easy, but I can still get that thin look by kind of gradually pinching out that rim. I can also give a texture to that rim by, again, doing something like I did earlier where I was patting on it, but I want to set that rim, and then again I can come in here later and clean this up, but I think I've got a pretty good texture, a pretty good leather hard state, and I can go through and kind of clean up those goobers now. And then I have a real sharp edge here, so what I like to do is I kind of roll it, and in rolling it I get that nice rolled edge. Now again, there's little goobers here, they're stuck on there. If I try to wipe them off, I'm just going to smear them in. So I'll let those kind of sit, and I'll brush them off later. This is the time when I want to address this seam. If I like it, I don't mind it. It's going to be pronounced. I can leave it like that. This little thing here on cleanup, one of the nice things you can do while your slip is still a little bit wet, you can take a nice brush like this, like fluffy brush, and you can get in there and just kind of brush that down real soft, blending that slip in and cleaning the corner of that edge. It can be really hard to do this. It's definitely hard to do it while it's on camera, but it can be really hard to clean up those inside edges. So you want to address those and get it all the way around. Okay, last but not least, I want to get a wear board. and set my pieces on there and cover them loosely with plastic. I want to make sure to sign my name, make sure that it's legible. Again, if I use the tip of a sharp tool, it's going to potentially cause these little crispy little bits to stick up. I can clean those up later. If you want, you can put the date 21, the year generally, the 21 on the bottom. I'll set both of these objects on my wear board, and I'll take that plastic and I will loosely wrap these in plastic just like that, and they're ready to dry just like that. I can also take an old t-shirt and throw a t-shirt over them if I know I'm ready. I generally like hand-built pieces to dry more slowly because of the seams and everything that went together. When you're using wheel-thrown pieces, they're a little bit more solid, less prone to cracking, and there's no seams, so they're not pulling apart, except for handles when you add handles. So this is how you'll want to store them to have them dry out. Don't forget, take some photos and upload them so that we can see your finished piece. Take some detail shots of the rim, of the texture, and some overall shots just to keep a record of your work.